Millionaire, shocked to find 3 girls crying in ICU, all with eyes just like his. The hospital corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and despair. Machines beeped softly behind closed doors. Nurses moved briskly, whispering in hushed tones. The ICU was a place where hope and fear collided every minute. Richard adjusted his suit jacket as he stepped inside. He was not a man used to hospitals. His life had always been surrounded by luxury, marble floors and private doctors. Yet here he was, visiting a sick employee who had been loyal to his company. His polished shoes echoed against the sterile floor. His sharp eyes scanned the hallway without emotion. He told himself he was there out of duty, not compassion. He hated the vulnerability that clung to hospitals. The smell, the silence, the waiting, it all unsettled him. As he exited the patient's room, his steps slowed unexpectedly. Something unusual caught his attention. Just ahead, in a dim corner of the ICU waiting area, sat 3 little girls. Their clothes were simple, worn at the edges. Their hair was slightly unkempt, as though no one had time to brush it. They huddled close together, their small bodies trembling. He paused, frowning slightly. He was not the type to notice children. He never had the patience for them. But this time, he couldn't look away. The eldest, perhaps 10 years old, had her arm wrapped protectively around the younger 2. The middle one buried her face into her sister's shoulder. The youngest clutched a torn little doll with faded buttons. Their tiny chests heaved with sobs. The sound was muffled, yet it cut through the silence of the ward. Richard felt something stir in his chest. He tried to walk past, but his eyes betrayed him. He looked again. Tears glistened on their cheeks. Their small hands wiped them away, only for more to fall. His jaw tightened. A part of him wanted to keep Walters. King to ignore them. That was the kind of man he was, detached, practical, cold. But something about those girls anchored his feet to the ground. Slowly he stepped closer. They didn't notice him at first. Their world seemed consumed by grief. The eldest raised her head, perhaps sensing his presence. Her gaze met his. And in that instant, Richard froze. His breath caught in his throat. Her eyes. They were a rare hazel green flecked with gold, a shade he had seen only in the mirror every morning of his life. His heart gave an unsteady thump. He glanced at the second girl. She lifted her face from her sister's shoulder. The same eyes stared back at him, wide, wet, innocent. His stomach clenched. The youngest, clutching the doll, peeked out timidly. Her eyes, too, identical. 3 sets of hazel-green eyes. 3 reflections of his own. He stumbled back a step, shaken. He had faced boardrooms filled with powerful men without fear. He had built empires, signed deals worth millions. Yet this silent encounter with 3 crying children, unraveled him. His mind raced. How could this be? He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. The girls, unaware of his turmoil, continued to sob softly. Their pain was raw, unguarded. The eldest tried to be brave, wiping her sister's face. She whispered something comforting, though her own voice trembled. Richard's throat tightened as he listened. A memory tugged at the edge of his mind, but he pushed it away. He told himself it was a coincidence. Many children had hazel eyes. It didn't mean anything. But deep inside, he knew it was more than coincidence. He couldn't shake the uncanny resemblance. His fingers twitched nervously at his side. For a man who thrived on control, this loss of composure was unbearable. He forced himself to glance away, but when he did, his gaze returned almost instantly. He was bound by those eyes, chained by them. Each tear that fell from their lashes felt like a stone sinking into his chest. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. His heartbeat was too loud in his ears. He wanted to speak, but no words formed. He took another cautious step closer. The youngest sniffled and hid her face again. The middle child rubbed her eyes with tiny fists. The eldest kept staring at him, almost studying his face. It unnerved him. Did she notice the resemblance too? His palms felt strangely clammy. For a moment, he considered turning and leaving. It would be easier. Walk away. Forget this strange encounter. Return to his orderly world. But his legs wouldn't move. Something unseen rooted him there. The corridor felt colder now, the silence heavier. A nurse passed by, giving him a quick glance, then hurried away. Richard cleared his throat, but still said nothing. He was a man known for commanding rooms with his voice. Yet here, before 3 crying children, he was speechless. His eyes softened despite himself. He noticed how thin they were, as though they hadn't eaten properly. He noticed the patched sleeve on the eldest's dress. He noticed the scuffed shoes of the middle child. Details he normally would have ignored now pressed against his heart. He inhaled slowly, trying to regain his composure. But the ache in his chest only grew. His gaze returned once more to their eyes. The resemblance was undeniable, not just in color, but in the way they shimmered when tears filled them. The same way his own eyes had shimmered in the rare moments he allowed himself to cry. He clenched his jaw, fighting the storm inside him. Who were they? Why did fate place them here, right in his path? He didn't have the answers, but he knew this was no ordinary encounter. The ICU suddenly felt suffocating, yet he couldn't leave. Those 3 pairs of eyes held him captive, and in the silence of the hospital, Richard's world began to shift, though he didn't yet understand why. Richard's throat tightened as he forced himself to take another step closer. His polished shoes made a faint sound against the floor, drawing the girl's attention. The eldest girl lifted her head again, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She didn't flinch at his presence. Instead, she straightened her small back, as if trying to appear braver than she felt. "Sir," she whispered, her voice fragile yet steady. Richard leaned slightly forward, straining to hear. "Our mum is very sick," she continued, her lip trembling. "We can't go inside." Her words were like a blade twisting into his chest. He glanced at the ICU doors just beyond them. Behind those doors lay a woman fighting for her life. And here were her children, too young to carry so heavy a burden. Richard swallowed hard. He wasn't supposed to care. Yet every word from the little girl's mouth echoed inside him. He felt as though he had stumbled into a story he didn't ask to be part of. His eyes softened despite his resistance. He cleared his throat. What happened to her?" he asked quietly. The eldest lowered her gaze. "She got sick a few weeks ago. She works too much. She fainted, and the doctors said she needed to stay." Richard clenched his fists at his side. There was strength in the child's voice, but beneath it was deep fear. The younger 2 remained silent, clinging to their sister's arm. He crouched slightly, trying to meet their eye level. He didn't know why he did it. It was unlike him. "Where's your father?" he asked, his voice lower now. The question hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. The youngest girl, barely more than 5, sniffled. She hugged her doll tighter and whispered, "We don't have one." Richard's breath hitched. The words struck him harder than he expected. No father, just 3 little girls and a sick mother. His chest constricted, a feeling he couldn't name. For a moment, he forgot he was a man of wealth and power. In that quiet hallway, he was simply a man staring at 3 children who mirrored pieces of himself. His voice trembled before he steadied it. Who takes care of you?" The eldest hesitated. Her eyes flickered with something, a mixture of pride and pain. "I do," she said finally. Richard blinked. The weight of responsibility in her small voice was staggering. "You?" he asked softly, almost disbelieving. She nodded, clutching the hands of her sisters tighter. "I cook for them. I help them with homework. I make sure they're safe when Mama works." Richard's throat burned. He saw a piece of himself in her strength, but also a piece of the loneliness he once carried as a child. "How old are you?" he asked gently. 10, she answered with quiet dignity. 10. A child forced to be more than a child. His heart squeezed. He tried to form words, but nothing seemed right. Instead, he turned his attention to the middle girl. "And you?" he asked softly, trying not to frighten her. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I'm 8, she said, her voice barely audible. Richard nodded slowly, his eyes shifting to the youngest. "And you, little one?" She hugged her doll closer and whispered, 5. The numbers echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. 10, 8, 5. Such tender ages. Yet their eyes carried stories far older. He shifted uncomfortably, unused to this kind of conversation. Normally he spoke about contracts, profits, and negotiations. But here he was fumbling like a man stripped of every defense. "Do you stay here all the time?" he asked cautiously. The eldest nodded. "We don't want Mama to wake up alone." Her words pierced him again, sharper than any insult he'd ever received. He looked at the ICU doors once more, feeling the gravity of their loyalty. The youngest tugged at his sleeve timidly. He looked down in surprise. "Are you a doctor?" she asked with wide eyes. For the first time in years, Richard almost smiled. "No," he replied softly, shaking his head. "I'm just someone passing by." She blinked, as though trying to decide if she could trust him. The eldest placed a hand on her sister's shoulder. "Don't bother him," she said gently. Richard felt a pang at her words. She assumed he was like everyone else, too busy, too important to care. He wanted to protest, to say he wasn't bothered, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he watched them in silence for a moment longer. His chest ached with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He thought of his own childhood, nights when he had cried quietly, wishing someone would sit beside him, wishing someone would ask if he was okay. And now, standing here, he felt as if he was staring into a reflection of his past. He had buried those memories long ago, locking them behind walls of wealth and ambition. But the sight of these 3 girls was tearing those walls down brick by brick. His jaw tightened. He tried to maintain the appearance of composure, but inside he was unraveling. He shifted his weight, unsure what to do next. Should he walk away? Should he ask more? A part of him feared the answers. Yet another part of him couldn't leave them here, not like this. The youngest leaned her head against her sister's shoulder again. "I miss Mama," she murmured softly. The middle girl sniffled, trying to be brave. The eldest stroked her sister's hair gently. "She'll be okay," she whispered, though even she didn't sound certain. Richard's throat tightened painfully. He wanted to believe her words. He wanted to offer comfort, though he didn't know how. His life had not prepared him for this moment. Deals, wealth, business. Those were his world. But this fragile, trembling honesty was something else entirely. He stared at the 3 pairs of hazel-green eyes again. He felt as if he was staring into mirrors of his soul. The resemblance was uncanny, undeniable. His heart skipped another beat. Questions he wasn't ready to face began to stir. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. And though he didn't yet know why, Richard felt his life had just changed forever. Richard's pulse thudded in his ears as he straightened his shoulders. He forced his gaze away from the children and toward the ICU doors. His thoughts swirled with unanswered questions. He needed to know who was lying behind that door. Gathering his composure, he approached the nearest nurse's station. A young nurse was flipping through charts, her expression tired yet kind. Richard cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice lower than usual. The nurse looked up, slightly startled by the presence of such a well-dressed man. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" He hesitated, then gestured subtly toward the ICU room. The woman inside, "What's her name?" The nurse frowned, uncertain if she should reveal such information. Richard leaned forward slightly, his tone gentler. Please. Just her name. The nurse studied him for a long moment. Something in his eyes, an urgency, a quiet desperation, softened her reluctance. She sighed and lowered her voice. Her name is Anna. The world seemed to still around him. His breath faltered, catching in his chest. Anna. A name he hadn't heard in years, yet one that lived deep in his memory. The nurse continued, unaware of his inner storm. She's a single mother. 3 girls. She's been struggling alone for years. Richard's jaw tightened as he listened. Working day and night, the nurse added softly. Barely enough to make ends meet, but she always puts her daughters first. Each word struck him like a hammer against stone. He could see the truth in the children's tired faces, and now the story behind them was unfolding. The nurse shook her head sadly. She never complains, but we can see the exhaustion in her. It's like she's been carrying the world on her shoulders. Richard's fingers curled tightly around the edge of the counter. He was silent, but inside his mind was chaos. Anna, his Anna. Memories long buried began to claw too, their way back. He saw a younger version of himself, ambitious, restless, determined. He saw her beside him, laughter in her eyes, dreams in her voice. She had always believed in him, always encouraged him, until the day he walked away. He had chosen wealth, status, and power over love. At the time, it had seemed like the right decision. He told himself he would come back for her one day. But the years piled up, and he never did. And now, fate had brought him here. To this hospital, to this ICU, to the woman he once loved, lying weak and broken. His throat tightened painfully. Anna, he whispered under his breath, almost inaudible. The nurse glanced at him curiously. Do you know her? She asked. He hesitated, fighting to mask the storm in his expression. I used to, he murmured, his voice rough. The nurse tilted her head but didn't press further. She returned to her paperwork, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Richard turned slightly, his gaze drifting back to the 3 girls. They sat close together still, whispering among themselves. His chest tightened again. If Anna was their mother, then what did that make him? He forced himself to look away. His mind reeled with fragments of the past. He remembered the summer evenings they spent under the stars. He remembered the way Anna's eyes sparkled when she spoke of the future. She had always dreamed of a family, a home filled with laughter, and he had walked away from it all. His ambition had been louder than her voice, louder than his love for her, louder than the life they could have built. Now, standing in the sterile glow of the ICU, he wondered if fate was punishing him. He wondered if this was his reckoning. His pulse quickened as guilt surged through him. Had she suffered all these years because of his choice? Had he condemned her to struggle alone while he lived in luxury? He pressed a hand to his forehead, overwhelmed. A faint buzzing filled his ears, the sound of shame he couldn't silence. The nurse's words replayed relentlessly. Single mother. Struggling alone. Always for her daughters. His mind spun faster, the weight of realization sinking deeper. Anna, the woman he abandoned, was here, alive but fragile, fighting for her life. And those 3 little girls with hazel-green eyes. He didn't need anyone to confirm what his heart already knew. The resemblance wasn't coincidence. It was truth staring him in the face. He gripped the counter harder, his knuckles turning white. The urge to see her grew stronger with every heartbeat. He needed answers. He needed to hear her voice, even if it was faint. He needed to know if she had ever thought of him in all these years. Slowly, he turned toward the ICU doors. His footsteps felt heavier now. Each one carried years of regret, years of choices made in pride. The corridor seemed longer than before. The faint hum of machines behind the door reached his ears. He stopped just outside the room, frozen. His hand hovered over the door handle. Fear clawed at him. What if she hated him? What if she had no strength left for even a word? He clenched his jaw, wrestling with hesitation. But the memory of her laughter, of her kindness, pushed him forward. The girls' faces flashed again in his mind. Their eyes had given him no choice. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. The sterile scent of the hospital pressed in around him. He felt small for the first time in years. Vulnerable, human. Slowly, deliberately, Richard placed his hand on the door. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken truths, and with a trembling breath, he prepared to step inside. The metal handle felt cold beneath Richard's palm. He pushed the door open slowly, almost afraid of what waited inside. A soft hiss of machinery filled the room. The steady beeping of a heart monitor echoed like a fragile reminder of life. He stepped in cautiously, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. The air was cooler here, heavy with the scent of disinfectant. His gaze landed on the bed. And there she was. Anna, pale against the white sheets, her once vibrant face now drawn with exhaustion. Her hair, once full of life, lay thin and tangled against the pillow. Her lips were dry, her skin fragile. Yet even in weakness, there was a quiet grace about her. Richard froze by the door, unable to move further. Memories collided violently with the present. He saw the girl she once was, the one who laughed under the summer sun, and now he saw the woman before him, worn by years of struggle. His heart ached so deeply, he thought it might break. Slowly, her eyelids fluttered open. At first, her gaze seemed distant, unfocused. Then her eyes landed on him. Time itself seemed to pause. She blinked, as though unsure if he was real. Tears welled in her tired eyes. "Richard," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with emotion. The sound of his name on her lips shook him to the core. He staggered closer, his throat dry. "Anna," he breathed. His voice cracked. He hadn't said her name in decades, yet it rolled out like it had always belonged there. His knees felt unsteady as he reached her bedside. He stared down at her, unable to believe she was really here. The years melted away in that instant. All the wealth, the power, the loneliness, it faded in her presence. He wanted to speak, but words refused to come. Anna gazed at him with trembling lips. I never thought I'd see you again." Her voice broke and a tear slid down her cheek. Richard's chest tightened painfully. He reached for her hand without thinking. Her skin was frail, cool to the touch. Yet the moment his fingers closed around hers, something inside him cracked open. He bowed his head, fighting back the storm of regret. His voice trembled. "Those girls. Anna, tell me." He couldn't even finish the sentence. His question hung between them, raw and unfinished. Anna's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. A smile full of sorrow, yet also of truth. She nodded weakly. "Yes," she whispered. Her breath was shallow, but her words were clear. "They're yours." Richard froze. His eyes widened as the weight of her words sank in. 1,000 emotions collided in his chest at once. Shock, guilt, wonder, and a piercing ache that nearly brought him to his knees. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. He stared at her, as though trying to process the impossible. "Mine?" he whispered finally, his voice broken. Anna gave a faint nod. Her tears slid silently down her face. "All these years," she murmured, "I raised them alone. I wanted them to know love, even if it was only mine to give." Richard's eyes burned as tears threatened to fall. He squeezed her frail hand gently, terrified of hurting her. "Anna," he choked, "why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him with weary eyes. "You left, Richard. You chose your path." The truth in her voice struck him like a blow. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of it. He shook his head slowly. "I was a fool," he whispered. The monitors continued their steady beeping, filling the silence between them. His tears blurred his vision as he stared at her face. I should have been there. I should have been with you. Anna closed her eyes briefly, as though gathering strength. When she opened them again, her gaze was softer. I don't hate you, she said weakly. Life gave us different roads. I only did what I had to for my girls. Her words sliced him open. He bowed his head lower, unable to meet her gaze for a moment. His mind replayed years of choices, each one now feeling like a mistake. He thought of the business trips, the late nights, the endless pursuit of money. None of it mattered now. What mattered was lying in this bed before him. What mattered were the children outside the door. Richard wiped at his eyes quickly, ashamed of his tears. But Anna noticed, and her lips trembled into a faint smile. I never stopped hoping you'd find happiness, she whispered. He shook his head, his voice breaking. Happiness? Anna, I never found it. Not without you. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Her hand rested weakly in his, yet it was enough to make him feel grounded. His heart ached with every shallow breath she took. He wanted to take away her pain, to reverse time, to undo his choices, but all he could do was stay here now. Anna, he said softly, let me help you. Please. Her eyes shimmered, though her smile remained faint. You've already helped Richard, she whispered, by coming back. His throat closed at her words. He bowed his head until his forehead touched the back of her hand. I swear, he whispered, his voice breaking, I won't leave you again. She exhaled softly, the sound more like a sigh than a breath. Her eyes searched his face, as though looking for truth. Promise me, she murmured. He lifted his head, his hazel-green eyes shining with tears. I promise. Her lips curved faintly, relief washing over her expression. The weight of years seemed to ease from her shoulders. Richard brushed away a strand of hair from her face with trembling fingers. He saw her not as the weary woman lying in a hospital bed, but as the girl he had loved, the one he had never stopped loving. His chest swelled with a painful mixture of sorrow and devotion. He realized in that moment that no empire, no fortune, no success had ever filled the emptiness inside him. Only she had. Richard sank into the chair beside Anna's bed, his body heavy as stone. His knees trembled from the emotions that refused to quiet. He pressed her fragile hand between both of his, afraid to let go. The truth of years past pressed down on him like a crushing weight. Images of boardrooms, luxury hotels, and endless deals flashed before him. None of it mattered now. Not the contracts, not the victories, not the millions. What haunted him was the silence that filled his life when Anna wasn't in it. I should never have left you, he whispered, voice cracking. His eyes burned with regret he could no longer bury. Everything I thought I wanted, it was empty without you. Anna's gaze softened, though pain lingered in her tired eyes. She let a tear fall, tracing down her pale cheek. Richard's thumb brushed it away gently. Please, he said, his voice desperate. Let me make this right. Let me be there for you. For them. The room grew quiet except for the rhythm of her shallow breaths. Anna's chest rose slowly, as if each breath cost her strength. Richard, she whispered, the past cannot be erased. Her words pierced him deeper than any blade. He lowered his head, ashamed. I know, he admitted, voice rough. But maybe the future doesn't have to be lost too. She studied him in silence, searching his face for truth. His eyes pleaded with hers, no longer cold, no longer distant. They were raw, vulnerable, and filled with longing. I missed their first steps, he said softly. His throat tightened as guilt poured out. I missed their birthdays, their laughter, Their tears. He swallowed hard, unable to stop the flood of emotions. I wasn't there when you needed me the most. Anna's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. More tears rolled down her cheeks, unbidden but cleansing. Relief mingled with her sorrow. At last, the weight she had carried alone for years was no longer hers alone. I was angry for so long, she admitted, her voice a whisper, but anger faded. What remained was love, for my girls, for the life I tried to give them. Richard clutched her hand tighter, tears slipping from his own eyes. And what about me? He asked brokenly. Was there ever love left for me? Her silence stretched painfully. Finally, she nodded faintly. Yes, she breathed. There was. There always was. His heart clenched at her confession. He bowed his high voice, leaned against her hand, kissing it gently. I don't deserve it, he whispered. But I promise I'll spend whatever time I have proving it. Anna's tears flowed freely now, but her chest eased with each breath. She had carried the burden of raising 3 daughters alone, the weight of sacrifice, of nights without sleep, of days without rest. And here, at last, he was sharing in the pain. Her eyes closed briefly, overwhelmed by both exhaustion and relief. Richard watched her carefully, terrified of losing her. Stay with me, Anna, he urged softly. Don't leave me again. Not now that I've found you. His voice cracked, and a tear slid down his face. The memories of her laughter, her smile, her touch, collided with the reality of her frailty. His empire felt meaningless, his fortune like dust in his hands. The true wealth he had missed was lying right here. He squeezed her hand gently, grounding himself in the fragile warmth. Anna's lips curved faintly, though her strength was fading. I carried the weight of your absence for years, she whispered. But hearing this, hearing you now, it lifts some of it away. Richard closed his eyes, pressing her hand to his cheek. Then let me carry it now, he pleaded. All of it. The pain, the struggles, the fears. Let me take them from you. His tears dampened her skin, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she let her free hand rest weakly on his arm. That simple gesture broke him completely. It was forgiveness, even if unspoken. It was acceptance, even if fragile. I was blinded by greed, Richard confessed. By ambition, by the illusion of success. I lost what mattered most. His voice was heavy with shame. I thought wealth would fill the emptiness inside me. He shook his head slowly. But without you, without them, I was only a shell. Anna's weary eyes shimmered as she listened. She had waited years for him to say what her heart had always known. His hand trembled as he continued. Let me be the father they deserve, he begged. Let me give them the childhood I stole from them. Anna inhaled shakily, tears still falling. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't carrying her world alone. Richard, she whispered, they need stability, love, not just money. He nodded quickly. I know. And I'll give them that. I'll give them me. His vow hung heavy in the sterile air. It was not about power. It was not about control. It was about love. The one thing he had failed to offer before. The weight of regret bore down on him, yet within it bloomed determination. His eyes locked on hers, unwavering. I'll stay, he promised again. Through every sleepless night, through every fear. I'll stay. Anna's tears fell harder, but her smile grew faintly stronger. For the first time in years, she did not feel abandoned. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone. Richard leaned closer, his voice breaking into a whisper. Forgive me, Anna. Forgive me for every day I wasn't here. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her breathing fragile but steady. I already have, she murmured. The words washed over him like rain on scorched earth. He buried his face into her hand, sobbing silently. The weight of regret had finally broken free, spilling out in tears he had held back for decades. His shoulders shook, his body trembling with emotion. Anna's weak hand brushed his hair gently, like she had done when they were young. The gesture was faint, but it carried more strength than words. Richard lifted his head, his eyes red but resolute. "I will not waste another moment," he vowed. "Not with you, not with them." His voice carried a conviction that had been missing from his life. He no longer spoke as a businessman but as a father, as a man who had rediscovered love. Anna gave him a faint nod, her tears still shining. "Then prove it," she whispered softly. "Not to me, but to them." The challenge struck him with both pain and hope. He tightened his grip on Susan, her hand, determination hardening inside him. "I will," he promised, his voice firm despite his tears. "I swear I will." The days that followed were unlike any Richard had ever known. He remained by Anna's side, refusing to leave the hospital. Business calls went unanswered, meetings postponed, contracts forgotten. For the first time, none of it mattered. His world had narrowed to a single room and the fragile people within it. With better treatment he arranged, Anna's strength began to return. Her pale cheeks slowly regained color. Her voice grew steadier, no longer fading with each word. The doctors nodded with approval as they adjusted her care. Richard spared no expense, but it wasn't just money. It was presence. He sat by her bedside, reading softly when she was too weak to sleep. He fed her soup when her hands trembled. He made sure the nurses gave her every ounce of attention she needed. Anna watched in silence, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't name. This was not the Richard who had once left. This was a man transformed by love and regret. Outside the ICU, the girls waited each day. At first they had been shy around him. Their small eyes looked at him with curiosity, even suspicion. They clung to one another more than to him. But slowly, something shifted. One afternoon, the eldest reached for his hand without thinking. Richard froze, then gently wrapped his fingers around hers. Her tiny hand was warm, and his heart thudded with joy. Soon after, the middle child followed, slipping her fingers into his other palm. The youngest clung shyly to his sleeve, her gaze full of hesitant trust. Richard felt tears sting his eyes. 3 little girls, once strangers, now reaching out for him. The man who had built empires now found his greatest victory in their touch. Each day they grew bolder. They sat on his lap, listening as he told them stories about his childhood. They giggled when he tried to braid their hair, fumbling with the strands. They laughed when he made funny faces to distract them from worry. The sterile hospital hallways began to echo with their joy. Nurses passing by smiled, whispering about the change in the millionaire. He was no longer the cold, untouchable figure people knew. He was simply a father learning to love. The girls clung to him when visiting hours ended. Their small voices begged, "Stay with us." And he always did. He stayed until their eyelids drooped and they fell asleep on his shoulders. Richard carried them carefully, one by one, to their small cots. His chest ached with pride and pain all at once. Pride that they trusted him. Pain that he had missed the years leading up to this. Still, he vowed silently never to miss another moment again. When Anna grew stronger, the girls ran into her arms with joy. Richard stood back, watching the reunion with tear-filled eyes. Anna looked over their heads at him, her gaze soft. She no longer saw just the man who had left. She saw the father who had finally come home. Together they became a family in those quiet hospital corridors. Meals were shared, laughter spread, tears were dried. Richard often sat between the girls, their small hands gripping his tightly. It was a simple thing, yet it filled a void he had carried for decades. One morning, he walked them to the hospital garden. The sun bathed their faces in golden light. The girls chased each other, their giggles bright against the morning air. Richard sat beside Anna in her wheelchair, watching them run. His hand rested gently on hers. "Look at them," he whispered. Anna smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "They've never laughed this much," she admitted. Richard swallowed hard, guilt still lingering, but Anna shook her head softly. "Don't drown in the past," she said. "Just be here, be their father now." Her words pierced him, not with pain but with hope. He nodded slowly, easing her hand. "I will," he promised. The girls soon ran back, breathless and laughing. They piled into his lap, giggling as they tugged at his tie. Richard laughed with them, his heart lighter than ever. Their hazel-green eyes sparkled in the sunlight, eyes just like his. He kissed their foreheads one by one. "I will never let you cry alone again," he whispered softly. The girls hugged him tighter, as if they already believed him. The hospital staff paused to watch the sight. A family, once broken, now whole again. Richard looked at Anna, her smile fragile but real. He mouthed the words, "Thank you." She nodded, her eyes shimmering with unspoken forgiveness. That night, Richard sat with the girls as they drifted to sleep. Their breaths rose and fell in quiet rhythm. He stayed awake, simply listening. Each sound, each sigh, felt like music. For the first time, his life felt rich, not with gold, but with love. He whispered into the darkness, "This is what I was missing." His heart no longer craved power or titles, it craved family. Days turned into weeks, and Anna's health steadily improved. Soon she walked again, slowly but surely, with Richard at her side. The girls cheered for her, their voices filling the halls with joy. Richard held her hand every step of the way. His promise was no longer just words, it was action. He learned their favorite stories. He tucked them into bed with gentle kisses. He wiped their tears when they cried. He celebrated their small victories, clapping the loudest each time. The mansion he once lived in, alone, no longer felt empty. He imagined its halls filled with their laughter. He dreamed of dinners at one long table, all together. He longed for mornings where noise replaced silence, and he knew those dreams would soon be real. The millionaire, once proud of his empire, now cherished something greater: love, family, forgiveness. On one quiet evening, Richard sat with his daughters under the fading sunset. Their eyes reflected the glow of the sky. They leaned against him, safe and content. Anna watched from nearby, her heart full. She saw the man she once loved, now transformed. He was no longer the boy who chose ambition over love. He was the man who had returned to what truly mattered. Richard closed his eyes, overwhelmed with gratitude. He finally understood. Wealth meant nothing without people to share it with. The man who once thought he had everything had finally found his missing piece. And for the first time in decades, Richard felt whole,